Hey everybody,
Hello.
welcome back to the Unreal Engine live stream. I'm your host Alexander Pascal, and it's just really great to have you all back. Joining us today is Tim Hobson once again to talk about lighting. So we're just going to hop right in and jump on into, actually, if you have anything you want to say before we jump to the main screen.
Okay, so as I've kind of said with some of the previous streams, especially the lighting one I did last time, is don't expect to walk away a lighting artist at the end of this. I'm not a lighting artist. I'm just here to show you some of the features that you have available to you that you may not be aware of, and just to kind of shoot through a lot of those, and just hopefully show you some cool things.
Yep.
But while we're at that, I want to definitely call this out and
Jump on over.
So Daedalus 51 has this really awesome Lighting Academy
it's very
series.
cool.
He's a lighting artist at DICE.
No big deal, just dice.
Yeah, just dice.
Just dice.
So
No big deal, no big deal.
Used to work at Yager,
awesome
so
dudes.
it's like he's got a really awesome series here. So it's like if you want to be a lighting artist, he takes these scenes and he relights them and he shows you some of his student work or his students' work. So there's some really cool things here that I think for anyone that's wanting to take that lighting artist approach, he has some really awesome information. I always like to direct people towards this one. So with that being said,
and we've actually spotlighted that before on some of our other live streams.
It's been spotlighted. I think it was even
really
on
great one.
The launcher as well. So
we really love that post. It's got a lot of great info
and
in
it's he's always updating it. I think was it last week or earlier this week. Maybe he had another 2-hour video go up. So there's some really awesome things there. So I highly recommend it. Okay, so just to cover some of the things we're going to go over today, we're going to cover distance fields, just enabling some of the shadowing and the dynamic AO settings. We're going to cover light functions, IES profiles, a little bit on particle lights, and then we're going to do some of the optimization console variables that you may not be aware of. We'll go over shadow caching, some settings for point and spotlights, and then at the end I'm going to kind of show a little bit of day-night system optimizations and just some things you should be aware of. It's not going to be like a fully functional system or anything like that, so don't. This is just just to show you some things and remind you some things you should be aware of. Okay, so jumping in here, since I'm going to first start talking about distance fields, and then I'll kind of pause at the end of each section, so just to kind of hopefully answer some questions along the way instead of just kind of getting piled on at the end and having to jump back.
And we are taking questions live, so we might pause every now and then to grab these from,
absolutely.
From people.
Okay, so with distance fields, we have a lot of documentation on that right now with distance field shadows and distance field ambient occlusion that kind of cover a lot of the what is it. But just to show you really quickly, I've already got it enabled for this project. But we go down here to visualize mesh distance fields, and what you get here is you get a volume representation of your mesh that has been created. And the way you enable that is if we go in here to our project settings.
Yep, this is our edit project settings.
Yeah, edit project settings.
And then rendering.
Then under rendering, and then under our lighting section, you'll see where it says generate mesh distance fields, which I already have enabled. And then as soon as you enable it, it's going to ask you to restart your project. And then once everything restarts, it'll start building these volume textures for your meshes. And if you go to this visualization mode while it's doing that, you'll see these meshes just start to pop in as you're moving around or looking around the scene. So just to, since that's covered, let's see here. So let me go back to my normal visualization. I'll disable mesh distance fields here. Okay, so another thing, so we can just see our representation of our distance fields in shadow form. What I'm going to do is my directional light here. I've got, I'm just going to type in distance and spell it right. And then I can see here where it says ray trace distance fields. So on all your point, spot, or directional lights, you have this option to enable distance fields. So if I enable that, you'll notice it didn't really like there was a change. So that's because with our cascaded shadow maps for our regular directional light, you can't see those within the 20,000 units that's our default. So if I just go ahead and lower that down to 0, you can see this representation really easily, because now we're just relying solely on the distance fields to shadow. So again, if I enable or disable those, I can see those pop in and out. So the first thing I really wanted to cover in this part of it is the quality of the shadow that you can get from that. Now, I've got several different meshes here that we'll kind of go through. So there's the material object sphere that you may have seen, and then this one is taken from the Sun Temple project that we have, the little statue. So what I've done here is I've gone and I've increased the resolution of the volume texture that is created, and I've got below it listed. Let me put it in a game view so let's see that text actor. What you'll see is the texture cost that you get from that volume texture. So, and then as you increase the resolution, you're increasing that cost exponentially, but you may not be getting the shadow resolution, quality gains that justify that cost. So, like for instance here, actually I'm going to take and rotate my directional light and make it a little easier. I'm probably going to have to do this a couple of times during this. Okay, so with this one here, with the default setting for the resolution, and I'll switch to the mesh distance field view in a second to show you, you may see like the shadows like on the wings, it doesn't have a high enough resolution, so you may start to see like these little holes or whatever where light can kind of pass through, but it's, a slightly increased different distance field resolution. You get a little bit more cost on the volume texture, but you get a substantially better shadow. It just depends on the performance that you need for, what your performance cost is that you want to deal with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the visualization here real quick. And what we can see is we can see our volume texture resolutions. And I'll show you how to set these in one moment too. So with this one, the volume that's created around and the resolution of that texture is like, again, it's like, the holes that we were seeing in the shadows a second ago, it's like you can see those in the wings because there wasn't enough resolution there to capture that information. But if we increase it just a little bit, you start to fill in those gaps. And it doesn't have to be a whole number like 1 or 2 or 5. You can do like 1.25 or, and, get that variable cost in between. So, so if we go to, let me clear that, and we open up our static mesh in our, maximize this, and then in our build settings over here, there's several settings under here, and I'll be revisiting some of these settings during the rest of the stream. Excuse me. We have here at the bottom, distance field resolution scale, and this is where you would set this. So you would set this to whatever value you need. You can go even lower if you needed to, just depending on the asset that you have and the resolution that you need. And then afterwards, I'm not going to change this because it takes a second to rebuild the distance field for it, but you would change the value and then you would hit apply, and then that would rebuild your distance field for it. So, and then just to show this over here as well, so this is that same object sphere that we had a second ago for the materials. And you can see it's like this one is a default 1. It's just the same settings I had for the other one. So it's a 1, 2, and then I think it's 3 and then 5 or whatever. But you can see that there's no really any holes or anything, but around this sharper edge down here, for the base or for the face of it, where we have that indent for the Unreal logo, you start to see it's not as sharp a resolution. And of course, increasing that resolution with more cost, you get that extra added detail. So I'm gonna go back to my defaults here. Actually, make sure disable eye adaptation so it doesn't get super bright. So again, with this, it's like we're seeing the cost of the normal distance field resolution of 1. We get 0.1, and it increases exponentially. Up until a point, because the max volume resolution texture size that you can have is 128. Mm-hmm. So what you get is only a max of 4 megabytes. So while you can get some overkill, we don't let you completely kill it. And I think that's actually a limitation of D3D11, but I think I've seen that somewhere. But yeah, it's going to be, there's going to be some limitations somewhere. So, okay, so, all right, so let's see here. I've got a bunch of notes, as I always do, just to kind of run through. So with this now. Okay, so I'm going to move over here. I'm going to show some of the settings that we have in the lights. Because as I pointed out with the mesh distance field's resolution, and you saw that little bit of waviness on the mesh distance field that is generated, we start to see some of these self-shadowing artifacts that can appear around a mesh, like in these in-grooves and these corners. And it's like, they may not be like very desirable effects to have. So in our light source, there's two places you can actually change this. Light source is a global setting that actually affects everything in the scene, and then there's the project setting, or not project settings, the mesh settings. I'll show you that in just one moment. So if we go here under our directional light, you only get this option for the directional lights. There's an option here for ray start offset depth scale, and right now it's 0.003. You can actually lower that. Or I'm sorry, actually increase it just slightly. I'm just going to drag it just because you can't get the accuracy I want. But what you can do is you can drag it a little bit, and it's based on distance. So as you go further away, this may affect like something like rock faces more than it will something this small asset at this distance. But it's a way that you can offset some of these self-shadowing artifacts that can happen. The alternative for this is opening the static mesh itself, and then again in the build settings here we have this option for distance field bias, and you can actually adjust that in a positive value, and what it'll do is it'll shrink that distance field texture, or that volume texture, down inward just a little bit, so that way you don't get those self-shadowing artifacts, and it makes it just kind of more inset a little bit. So let's see here. I mean, I've still got some more stuff. Any questions been coming in?
Oh, yeah, we've got plenty of questions coming in for you. I just didn't want to interrupt you.
No, you're fine.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, we have quite a few questions about different stuff, but one about mesh distance field resolution here. Is there any significant cost beyond memory usage on increasing it?
Well, yeah, it's like, okay, so it's going to get to me a little bit, but like with cascaded shadow maps, that's like I was going to say, it's always like, for instance, like in the kite demo, what we did with that was we used a cascaded shadow map for the first 1,500 or 1,600 units. So that way everything around the character was actually in really sharp resolutions, and then anything else beyond that distance was actually relying on distance fields. So that way we got those far shadows, and we weren't paying the cost of the per triangle cost of shadows that we were with cascaded shadow maps versus distance fields, where it's not as costly. So
all right, and do distance field shadows generate soft shadows? Raildex was okay.
Yeah. I was gonna cover that in a little bit.
Okay, we're getting ahead of ourselves there.
Yeah,
but good question, Raildex.
I mean, I'll go ahead and jump into that one real quick because it's not a very so.
We have some questions here that I'm going to save to the end that aren't quite related to this, though.
Okay.
But there you go. Those are the ones related to this.
Or as the topics come up, you can just call them out. You.
Great work, buddy. This is really informative.
Okay, so if I go to light here, I'm just going to disable that and disable this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a point light here. So right now it's a stationary point light. And then I'm going to increase not that. Okay, so I've just got a larger radius here, so that way we can see. Okay, so with a movable point light, right now this is just using a shadow map. So you'll notice everything is really sharp. You don't get really that softness that you would maybe want at those further distances. So actually I'm going to move that right about there. So what we're going to do is, if we go down here to, let me find this, spell this wrong again, enable distance field shadows, and there's a default softness that's already used. So that way it's like you get that soft fall off from the statue or whatever is casting the shadow. But you can always control that with the source radius. So if we go here to our source radius, and we increase it. So it's like you may have noticed a pop there. So at 0, there's actually like a default setting. I think it's like 0.02 or 0.2. I can't remember exactly. Not 0.2. But if you increase that size, you can see it starting to increase. So it's like if I go to 10, actually I think it was like 20 maybe. You get this source radius, and this is the representation of it, this little yellow sphere that is around our light. So that's representing the size of our light source. So as we increase that, you get much more softness like from that light. And then as you're closer to the base of the object that is shadow casting, it's obviously going to be sharper. So I think that covers the source radius one for you.
Yeah, I think that should probably help them out.
Okay, so let me go ahead and get rid of that and put these back to where they were.
He does have a small follow-up.
Yeah.
Let's see here. To extend my question from earlier, in the documentation of DF soft shadows, there's a clip with changing time of day. However, I can't get dynamic soft shadows to work, even though I have the same settings. Hopefully that'll at least kind of show them.
Yeah. So the dynamic soft shading, so the time of day one, I think I know the one he's talking about, like where it's showing Fortnite from like this high angle, and then you're just kind of watching everything. What I showed earlier is like just to test it out, you may want to try lowering the dynamic shadow distance for your light. So for instance, back under here under cascaded shadow maps, dynamic shadow distance movable light here, you may have a large distance that's already set up, if you're using the default one, that may be covering, and it's like, I'm even at this distance, way back, I'm not seeing I'm still seeing just the cascaded shadow maps and not distance fields. So, but as you move back with distance fields, you can actually see much further. So that might be something for him to check. Okay, so let's see here. Source radius, covered that. Okay, so I had another. Okay, so I talked about that. Here, let me go back and rotate my light again. Talked about the distance filled bias from the project settings. So what I have here is this rock. And then this is just like from the standard content examples, or not content examples, starter content.
Okay.
So if I open up this, and then one I just took and I just applied a white material, so that way you can actually see it really easily.
This isn't Boy and His Kite? Oh no, I guess it is too low quality.
Some assets are, okay. In the next level, it's like
okay.
I'll show off. It's got some of those assets, but this is just straight from starter content. It's got enough like indented faces and like crevices that I thought it could actually show this off a little bit more easily.
Mm-hmm. So
the distance fill bias here. Haven't adjusted on that one. No. So if we go back to our mesh distance field view, visualize mesh distance fields, what you'll see here is we've got the two rock faces. I think that was actually, is a separate asset. No. So if we increase that, I'll just say to 1 and apply, it's going to rebuild for a second. And then when it comes back in, it's going to actually be a little bit lower, and it'll reduce some of those. I don't know if it actually shows up the best on here, but it's like some of the inset like self shadow artifacts that happen. It reduces some of those. Let's see here. I'm gonna hang on to distance fields here for a second before I go off to something else.
Okay.
I told you there's a bunch in this little test map, so trying to show it and not jump to something else and whatnot. So okay, so with things like trees, like this asset was this like Hilltop Tree 3 from the kite demo stuff, which we actually use distance fields on. So everything you're seeing right now, since we've reduced the light source, shadow distance. So right now I'm gonna give it like a 5,000 units. So what we get here is I've got some shadowing for cascaded shadow maps for this tree or whatever. And you can see the transitions happening. So if I remove that back down to 0, at this distance, what we're seeing the distance field that is created, just this shadow at a distance. And it's like you can see that there's actually, and this is just using the distance field resolution of 1. So, and then this one over here on the left is using the same settings, but we've actually enabled one separate setting to make it look softer. So, let's see here. Sorry if I sound a little disjointed. I'm trying to not sound that way.
It's all stream of consciousness, man.
I know, man. It's just, okay, so.
A live stream of consciousness. Clint, really show yourself out. No, wait, don't. We need you to work the back end.
Crush his head. Crush his head. Okay, so actually I had it backwards. So this one here on the left, we're looking at the mesh distance field that's generated. And you'll notice that it looks kind of clumpy. You probably get, like some of the shadows, if we actually look at those in detail, you actually see there's a little bit more like hard surfaces. It doesn't look more like a tree, like where you can actually see through some of the leaves. And then this one over here on the right, we've actually enabled a setting that allows it for two-sided foliage. And while it looks a little bit translucent here, what you get is this nice softer shadow for our trees. So, I'm about to use defaults. You get these nice little fall-offs here, and then it's like the overlapping of some of the translucent areas like start to fill in the gaps. So it's like you get this filled in shadowed. Whereas like this one that was more clumpy, just from the volume texture, not using two-sided, it's a little bit more disjointed. It doesn't look as nice. So what you do to enable that is we're going back to one of the project setting, or not project setting, I keep wanting to say project settings. The build settings for our mesh here. Okay, so if we scroll down to the bottom here, you'll have this option for generate distance field as if two-sided. And what that does is that gives you that nice softness to the shadow. But since it is a translucent shadow, you're going to pay more for that than you would for the other one. So it just depends on what your needs are for your project, but that's something to be aware of. If you wanted those nice kind of softer shadows, something that looks a little bit better. But the thing is too is like for the tree here, for like the base of the tree and the branches and everything, you'll notice it looks it's since it's translucent, it's got this little gap here where you can kind of see through it. So it's like this is something like where you're using a directional light, you don't want to just fall back on only using distance fields. So what we do is, just using a short distance, like, it's like if we just say even 2,500 units, it's like, at those further distances, you can still get those nice soft shadows that you can generate. But up close, we can actually get this nice, more detailed shadow that you would want, that you can't get without increasing that distance field resolution. So.
All right, I've got a question for you.
Yeah,
if you
go
have
for
a
it.
breather. So for distance field shadows here, Middle is asking, is there any way to turn on and off the distance field shadows in a game at runtime so that you can lower the shadow quality to medium,
Yes.
low, etc.?
Okay, so distance field shadows, it's a SM5 feature. I can't remember if it actually got SM4 stuff with it or not. I think it's still SM5 only. But it's, sorry, I can't recall that one immediately, but it's, yeah, so you can actually enable and disable it. So if I just go to here and play for a second, I've actually got a little menu thing that I made that I'll cover a little bit more in detail. But so this is all just like a little simple UI I made. And, whoops, sorry about that. If I back away, it's like you can actually enable and disable these on the fly. So
fancy.
So that's actually something that you don't have to worry about. So even if like our quality settings in the engine under settings, engine scalability, and why are those not all? Let's put those all on Epic.
Yeah. Probably. probably appropriate.
Under here is like you can actually like for shadows. So cinematic, epic, and high will all still incorporate distance field shadows in there. So it's like if your editor settings ever get lowered down to medium or low, those actually automatically get disabled. So it's like yes, they can all be enabled, disabled on the fly. Did you have another question or
no?
Oh, okay.
I think that
you took a breath. So
I was actually going over them to make sure
Okay.
I've covered all the ones that are about this in
Okay.
particular. Of course, we're getting questions left and right from all kinds of different stuff. I just want to make sure
Okay,
that this one was covered.
I'm sure there's some more distance field stuff I'm gonna cover, but like with AO and stuff in a minute. But so with this one, I covered this a little bit in the last stream, very briefly. But it's we have now Capsule Indirect Shadows that came out with like 4.11, 4.12. Can't remember exactly, but what that does is it allows you to have this in dynamic lighting. You can have this nice soft shadow for your characters now. So if we go to our let me show you how to enable that real quick. So what I've got is I got a skeleton asset here that I've that's straight from engine content. And if I go and type in shadow spelled correctly, there's a shadow physics object that we can assign here. And what this is just a capsule representation of our character. So that way it can have shadowing. Now, the thing with this is like the more capsules you have, the more expensive it is. So limit the number of capsules. That's why I don't have any arms on this one, because for this, like the character never, like for the example I have, it never is next to a wall, like where you would actually see those really details, and it doesn't lay down. So only having like the torso and head and everything else makes a little bit more sense for this one. But we actually have documentation that's up for this now. So let's see here. But that again would just be assigned to the shadow physics asset. And then for your character, what you can do is indirect shadows. And then what you'd have is capsule indirect shadow, and then let's see here. Let me actually select one. Be under lighting. Actually, let me do this cap. All right, so we have a couple options here for capsule direct shadows. Last time I covered a little bit more in detail with the capsule indirect shadows, since we were kind of covering a lot more with static lighting and just some of the tricks there. Since this is just a project using only direct and dynamic lighting, the capsule direct shadows here allows you to enable this feature.
Demir Halilovic, Demir is asking off of Twitch, can you have capsule indirect shadows without a shadow casting skylight?
Without a shadow casting skylight?
Like just like a point light, but no shadow casting skylight?
Yeah, you can have with a point light.
Cool. Cool.
Yeah, it's so for here, the to control the softness on it as well. So it's like you may want it to soften to match your other like if you're using distance field lights or anything like that. To have it match better, you can use the light source angle, and adjusting this can actually change that quality. So cool. And then just to show you as well, it's like since it is actually a physics asset, these shadows actually move and are tied to the character in a much more realistic way, and actually
look very nice and dynamic. Yeah,
nice softness there. So it's like again, just with the light source signal, you can change that depending on what you need. And if he actually had arms, you'd actually see him.
Oh, wow.
So right now it's just like this like torso with no arms.
Man. Yeah. Thanks, torso guy.
Yeah. So
and yeah, this is actually I think if you look into the 414 release notes, is it, or maybe 413? But in the release notes where they actually talk about this, you can see where we use it in Paragon and a couple other places in order to save performance.
It was 413. I think it's at 411.
It was at 411. Wow, was it that far back?
It's been in for a while. It might have been. I can't remember. They all blend together at this point. So.
yeah, but it's
like so many awesome features.
This is such a great performance saver, especially if you have a ton of skeletal meshes running around animating on the scene. So very cool. And one question about it: is
Yeah.
it possible to disable self-shadowing for capsule shadows? Yura was asking.
Self-shadowing for capsule shadows.
Yeah. Can you turn
I
off
don't-
self-shadowing on the one that's doing the capsule shadow rendering?
Let's see here. I don't think that actually works.
We'll
here.
find out.
Here, let me.
And I almost forgot to ask.
No.
Okay.
So
the answer's
yeah,
no.
it didn't.
Oh, okay. No,
Didn't do anything.
doesn't do anything on the capsule shadows because I guess that's.
I'm sorry, I
guess
don't
it's
know. I just
technically on the capsules and
Yeah.
not on.
Yeah,
the
I haven't.
mesh. That's interesting.
I never do self shadow only really. So
Okay.
it's like
So going back to everything we were talking about a second ago, is everything you were talking about as far as sorry, I'm just trying to grab this
nope,
question
that's fine.
again.
I'm getting
and
set up on the next thing while you're.
Okay. So with distance field shadows, are they calculated on CPU or GPU? There we go. I lost the question halfway through the thought.
Honestly don't know on that one.
Okay. A couple people were wondering about that one.
Okay, so is there anything else, or I'll just move on? to the
No,
next
you're
little-
good. You're good.
Okay.
All
All
good,
right. So
thank you.
everyone asked about contact shadows.
Yeah, actually, there were a few. Never mind. You're about to probably knock out a few questions
don't,
here.
Don't expect this one to be like super in depth or anything like that. It's I'm just gonna go over the feature, very basic, simple, like show you, some of the things that I've noticed it used for in like Paragon and just in general. So what I have here is I just have my 1 second. Just so we can see it a little bit easier, set that back down to 0. So what I have here is I just have just a bunch of plain meshes that have the bush from starter contents material applied, and I've just kind of overlapped them so that way you can kind of get these overlapping faces. And then contact shadows, and I'm only showing it without any distance just because contact. Am I not? Oh, I got to select the light source. So that way we can see really quickly. So I'm going to do 0.02, and what I get is you get this. So contact shadows are a screen space feature, and you'll notice as I turn the camera, this edge over here, it starts to go white because it's looking at the depth of the scene, and then what's it? It's a screen space feature. So sorry, I'm restarting my words here.
There you go. I have to do it sometimes too. They'll tell you like Alex will stumble over himself.
Okay, so
Pause.
yeah, since it's a screen space feature, it's like it can only render things that are in screen, and it only knows the depth of what is in the screen as well. So, so if I also let me disable ray trace distance fields, what you'll see is like any of these objects. So we're only looking at the contact shadows right now, and you'll notice that like as I move away, it's like. These things like the rock, it's not rendering this back face here, which we're not going to use contact shadows for these kind of features.
Oh, I see what you mean. The way that the shadow.
But what I'm showing
that
with
chunk
this part of
missing.
it, is showing that it can only see what's in screen space. So we know this part is in screen space, and it can kind of know this area, but it doesn't know what's behind it, so you don't see that part of it. So, the same with like our characters here, with the light directionality, is like as we move away, it's like, and I move further up, it's like I can see those legs on my character on this one start to pop in. So the same as over here is like as I move closer to these objects, I can see the shadow kind of like shifting and twisting around. Now, with all that said, you don't use this feature by itself. This is just a way to kind of debug it and just kind of quickly see what's going on. So, or at least that's how I've used it. So, so if I increase this, go back to 5,000. And then contact shadows, I'm going to put this back down to 0. So now the difference that we can see is like, okay, so did I actually type in 5,000? I think I typed in 500. Yep. So what I have here is I have, the mesh with shadowing, but as I move back and those cascades are lowering in quality, it's like, you lose some of that detail. So if I come back here and go back and I actually add a little bit of contact shadows, we can fill in some of those areas and help the cascaded shadow maps to actually give that extra added detail. So it's one of those things like you use it to kind of help your scene out, but it's not, you don't rely on it solely. So again, it's like without and with it. And I'm just using a very low value here, and it's like, depending on your scene and what you have, you may need to twist to adjust that and twist it to your needs. Okay, so next thing I'm gonna show here is I'm gonna go back and re-enable a lot of re-enabling and disabling stuff. So go back to ray trace distance fields. I'm gonna enable that. I've got a skylight in the scene, so I've already got distance filled ambient occlusion, which I'll show really quickly. We have a visualization mode for that. So if we go over here, distance filled ambient occlusion, and what you can see is our scene being represented. Since there's a lot of direct lighting here in this area, you don't get a lot of ambient occlusion that is really noticeable in general. So, all right, we can go back to defaults and show this. So now I've got those enabled, I'm gonna show off a light function. This is the one, I actually just pulled this straight from Kite Demo. I thought it was a really good example. So with our scene, we want to represent clouds in our scene, and one really easy way to do this is by using a light function. And so if I go in down here to my light, you actually have this section here for light function material, and this is the instance that was created from Kite Demo, and then we got some material magic here that was previously set up. And then the only thing I'm going to adjust is the speed here, so that way we can see what's going on more quickly and have it move through the scene. And do it 0.15. Save that. Maybe that was a little too fast. Well, so with the cloud, what you're seeing is, actually, I'm going to go back, lower that. That's way faster than I want. 0.15.
Wow, those are some fast-moving clouds.
Yes, they are. Okay, there we go.
It is a windy day.
It is a windy day.
Welcome to Seattle.
Okay. Or the Midwest during not hurricane season, but tornado season.
Yeah.
Okay, so, all right, so the awesome thing with these light functions is that as it starts to shadow areas, this is, people ask, how can you get more realistic lighting? I think this is a really awesome way to kind of do that, because you can get these kind of transitions between, granted, I have no clouds up here that are showing, but, with this light function, is the way it's going over the landscape here in our areas, as it hits these darker areas, it's shadowing the area, and then we start to get these nice little, if you've ever had a really cloudy day, and you just start to see this nice kind of softness of light and everything, from shadows from trees and whatnot. Is there another dark area coming? Yeah. Okay, we got this little dark cloud back here coming up. And what you're going to see is that under these trees, you're going to get this really nice AO that's starting to populate. So as that shadow fades out, it's we can start to see that AO takes over, and you start to get this really awesome kind of thing with distance field ambient occlusion. I think that's a really awesome kind of consideration just to remember, whenever you're using light functions, it's just, you can add to your scene. Okay, so I'm going to stop that real quick.
You got a second for a question?
Yeah. Go for a question. I'll set up the next section.
Cool. So let's see here. Quite a few people were curious after talking about the contact shadows, et cetera, et cetera. Do you have tips for dynamic lighting in dark rooms / caves? Is there...
Last part of the string.
Okay, that's good. Okay. All right, sweet. You know what? That's a series of questions about that kind of thing. So we'll get to that in
This is why I didn't want to do anything on the fly last week, when we were having trouble.
Oh, yeah.
It was I had some stuff already set up. So, all right, so that we can just see, the last thing I want to cover in this little section is just distance filled ambient occlusion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just disable my directional light here. And let me just type in effect. Okay, so now this is just my ambient occlusion from my movable skylight for the area here. So just to quickly show off some stuff for the settings for skylight. So under the details panel here, distance field ambient occlusion. This is where you get the most control for like all of these settings for distance fields for ambient occlusion. So we have the first setting here, which is occlusion max distance. What that's doing is that's taking the max distance between a surface and casting onto another surface. So as it's increased, sorry, 1 second. It'll give more AO into the area below it that's going to be casting onto. So, and then we have our contrast, which is going to darken, or either like contrast and min occlusion here, I think should be used together. So it's like you would have contrast to kind of darken some of those areas that are occluded, and you're getting that AO under it. And then you would use the min occlusion to actually lighten that up a little bit, so that way it's not looking as dark. But it's a good way to kind of call out some of these areas and highlight some areas without it to affect whatever the occlusion is that you have in that area, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think you just agree with me all the time.
I just agree with you because I know that you know more than I do about this, and so a lot of my input's just going to be like, I assume that you're correct. Just enough to get yourself in trouble, right?
Yeah, that's about where I stand all the time. Just enough to get myself in trouble. Okay, so the last one here that we have is occlusion tint. This is just a completely like artistic control of everything. So by default, everything is on all the way down full black. But you can use it depending on like your scene, like especially if you have like a stylized kind of scene, or you have something that you want to kind of simulate like a little bit more like a different color. Like if you had like a landscape area or whatever and you wanted to be a little bit more green or whatever color, this can actually help to, you can just, it'll adjust all the ambient occlusion that's happening. So now our tree looks like fall. So.
So fancy.
Granted, that's not a direct use, but I thought that was pretty cool. Okay, so any other questions on this, or I'm just gonna
let you keep going. A lot of these, it feels like if I save them to the end, you're gonna end up answering them.
Okay.
Because it's gonna be things like 2D shadows. I don't know if you're gonna be talking about.
I had no plan on 2D shadows.
Yeah. We might have to do something with more 2D because that's more of like a sprite rendering question. But other than that, it looks like a lot of these you'll probably end up hitting up.
Okay, so to get away from distance field for just a minute, we're gonna go over and we're gonna talk about IES profiles. I don't think a lot of people know about this.
But they're so much fun.
Yes,
I love IES profiles.
Yes, I agree. So it's like for the longest time, I actually didn't know about this feature, and it was something I just kind of stumbled across like after like reading something on the forums, and I think Daniel may have posted it. And it was just like it was like an old post from like 2014, but it's like I think I had gone like a year or two here and never knew about this. So IES profiles, what this is it's let me have my actual. So IES stands for Illuminating Engineering Society, and they have like this whole like profile of like how a light should look for the type of light that it is.
I didn't know that's what that stood for. I've been using
I didn't
it
either.
for so long.
That's why I had to write it down so that way I remember. But
do you have like a base summary though? Because I feel like it sounds like a complicated thing. It's just like the way that light shines out of
really
your flashlight.
So it's like what we have is we have this this doesn't look anything interesting, but this is the profile that is for it. And it's like I think there's like if you go on and look up like on their official websites and things like that, they actually have like this whole like viewer, so that way you can see things. But it's like if I'm looking over here in this, I know it's very small, but in the details panel, you can actually see how the light is supposed to look. And this is how it looks in like their little profile viewer. I don't know if there's something like that in UE4 or not, but to view it in that way. But these things are like really cool because you can apply them to a light and it looks like it has shadows, but you may not want to pay the shadowing cost.
Mm-hmm. So
you can disable casting shadows and still get this really interesting like look for your lights. So, I think on mobile, like where a lot of people were doing, and they always want like some dynamic lighting, but they, it's like we have point lights that don't cast shadows currently. I don't think it supports spotlights at all yet. And, this is one way to kind of get some interesting looks out of those point lights that you have for mobile.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and even like other projects. So what I've done is I've just gone through in our engine content. So if you go to view options, engine content, and then select this, and I think it's just IES. You'll get a bunch of textures here for these IES profiles. And then that's all I used for these, just to show these off really quickly. So what I have here is these are just point lights that are all lined up. And they're all movable point lights at that, with cast shadowing disabled. So you get this really neat look for your light, but you're not paying any shadowing cost. So if I come back over here to, I've got like several, whoops, I just took off.
Oh, we have a small request. Stefan off of Facebook wants us to just repeat the name of the IES thing.
Illuminating Engineering Society.
Illuminating Engineering Society.
Yes.
I hope that helps you out, buddy. That's a new one for me, too.
Yeah. Okay, so and I've got the same profiles that I had over here in this back one. Just same thing applied to a spotlight here, and just showing that you kind of get this same kind of neat shadowed kind of look that's interesting without any shadow casting. So, and then finally, well, I got two more sections in this, but what I did here is I wanted to show shadow casting with a spotlight, and I'm gonna go to unlit mode for just a second. So what I grabbed is from the starter content. We have like this little sconce. That's the word.
I knew that feeling.
See, that's why I keep you around.
Word?
That's why you're awesome to have around. So we have this sconce, and I just have a point light in one of these, or spotlight in one of these, with a short attenuation radius. And like this one here doesn't have, it's shadow casting, or no, that one's actually not casting shadows. Actually, I have it enabled over there. But it gets the same look as using an IES profile. So it's like I just want to show that there's possibilities to get a similar look, but you're using some of these profiles without it. And then same for this kind of one that's gone down. So on this one, I've got Effects World. I've got the no shadow casting, and then same thing over here. And I just wanted to show that you can get this kind of similar look. And actually, I think like on the IES profile over here, it's got like a sharper edge, so it actually looks a little bit tighter around that edge without that fall off. So, and then finally over here is like I had the hanging wall light or the hanging light that's got a spotlight below it. And then what I've got is this one's with an IES profile, and then this one's without. These are shadow casting.
You can see that fall off as
and I just
very
want to show
different.
that it's like with the one that's not using IES profile, this one in the back here, it's like you get the shadow resolution of that shadow map that's created. It starts to not give you as tight of an edge, whereas using the one here with the IES profile, we still get that nice tighter edge. And I think those can just kind of, using IES profiles, I think can kind of benefit depending on what your needs are. And it's like, I just think there's some really cool things to do with them. So that's all I had for this section. If anyone had any questions.
Yeah, actually, we have one little question here. Can you, if these aren't dynamic, if these are static, can you just bake the IES profile lighting onto the surface?
You can.
Yes.
But it won't necessarily look the best at times. So, like for instance, like let's see here. Go back over to here. Like one like this one, I think we actually have this in content examples that use static lighting. And with this profile, what you get is like you get this really nice softness between it, and it actually looks like the light actually has some depth to it from whatever it's casting from, like whatever that profile was actually taken from. Whereas like if it is a baked one, you're relying on the shadow light map resolution, so it doesn't have as soft a shadow as I would expect it to. So yes, you can do it, but it doesn't always. I guess it just depends on what you're changing the settings on and how high your light map resolutions are willing to go.
All right, let me see here. We have a lot of questions that I'm going to save to the end still, but yeah, nothing that's going to come up here.
And then I guess before I move on to the last little map that I had, I'm just going to go over some project settings. I probably should have gone over this first, but I'm all over the place all the time, so we'll see here. So what I'm going to go through is just some of the project settings and some of the things that you can do for optimizing I guess your lighting. So one thing right off the bat is we can go here to our project settings. So edit project settings, then open up the rendering section. And then if we go down here to lighting, if your project never intends to use static lighting at all, just go ahead and disable allow static lighting. So that way you don't really ever have to worry about it. I think there's actually some cost savings there as well, because it's not worrying about, let's see here, requires a restart of the engine.
That's, I mean, that's actually a pretty fair thing to know about. I mean, like games like, I think Ark has no static lighting. It's only...
Yeah, it's like, I mean, there's a lot of like more open world games, and even games that aren't open world that use only dynamic lighting. So.
I'm sure that there's quite a few of those, like the crafting survival games, that it's all like procedural-esque generation. Yeah.
So there's a similar setting that is per level. So I'm going to drag this off for a second. So if we go up here to settings, world settings, and then you look up force no pre-computed lighting, you can actually have this on specific levels that you don't want to have any pre-computed lighting as well. So that doesn't require a project restart, since it's not project wide, but that's something to be aware of. It's like if you transition to some open field and you don't want to worry with any static lighting at all, then that's definitely something to go ahead and enable. Back in the project settings here, if you're developing on mobile, talked about a little bit with cascaded shadow maps. You can actually set, so you can have the max of 4, but you can actually set those to, and the default is 2 in our project settings, but you can actually reduce that or increase it depending on what your project scope is and what you have for mobile. So let's see here. I'm going to go back to one other map here, and then some of those console variables I had shown off very briefly. We'll discuss some of those. So go back to this one. Let me re-enable. Remember all the settings I had. Let's see here, effects world. Yes. Okay, so. All right, so I'm going to talk about some of the cascaded shadow map settings really quick before I show off some of the console variables. So with these, we have our dynamic shadow distance, which, again, for depending on your project, keeping this at a minimum is always going to keep your performance higher, because cascaded shadow maps are going to, they're lighting per triangle. So it's like if you have a really complex mesh, like this tree here, which is using it's got close to 50,000 triangles on it, versus this mesh over here, which probably has like 2,000 or 3,000. It's definitely going to be a more significant cost in quality, to light that than it would be for a lower resolution mesh or less complex one. So if we're looking at the, let's see here, light. Nope. We have the number of cascades here. So you can actually set this, like default is 3, but you can actually increase these. So it's like if I lower this down to 0, right now it's only using distance field shadow since I've got that enabled. I'm going to disable that for the moment, just for purposes of seeing this more easily. So if I increase it to 1, we see that the shadow resolution, actually, I'm sorry, let me go back to the light function and stop that movement. So we see the quality of that shadow up close isn't always going to be the best. So if you increase, what you get is you get more cascades are used across this the distance of your light to give a higher resolution quality. So one thing you may notice here is there's a transition where we get this really high quality up close, and this transitional line for the next cascade where it's going to actually downgrade that quality. So that way you're not paying like this really high cost all the way, off into the far distance. So you can actually use these things like transition scale to adjust, how that transition happens between those. And then you can choose how close to the camera it happens between those transitions as well. So, and then there's another option in here for far cascades. So anything that's beyond what, like, say, distance fields would be, is like you wouldn't use this on every object, but it's like if you had like a giant building, let's just say off in the far distance, and you want to have a little bit of a shadow that we don't need like super high quality on, but just a little bit, you can enable this far shadow option, and then you can select whatever the object is and enable a far shadow, and that would allow it to have that shadowing at those far distances. Okay, so next thing I'm going to show is to go over some of those console variables. Well, actually, let me go back and feel so spastic today.
It's cool, man.
I'm like all
I
over
don't
the
think
place.
you're just fast. You're doing fine.
Yeah. Okay, so I got my distance fields back enabled.
It's all good.
Put this back here. I'll put that back to 5,000, so that way see a little bit. Okay. Actually, I'm going to do that a little bit closer. Let me do 1,500. Okay, so I'm going to hit play here. And then, all right, so what I have over here is in my little UI is I've got our shadow max resolution. And let me get my sheet because I make a bunch of notes. So what this is this is the max square dimensions allowed to render for shadow depths. So higher values is going to be higher resolutions. So what I've got is 256, 512, 1024, and 2048. All of the bold ones are the actual default values. And actually max shadow resolutions can go up to a max of 4096, which if anyone's ever used like the settings into scalability cinematic for shadows, actually that's the only setting that it increases, is it increases that shadow resolution up to 4096. But that's for cinematics. So
we don't need that.
I mean, you could always
at
increase
runtime.
it if you have like a super ultra, like it's possible, but
the
it's
PC
like,
build with all the high quality textures. Sure, why not?
So if I go here and it's like as I lower these, what you can see is it's still got the shadow transitions and whatnot, but it's just lowering the resolution of that shadow map that's created. So that's one thing that it's a good scalability option that you can do for lower end PCs, or just having as a scalability option for anyone who doesn't want to pay those shadowing costs. All right, and then we have our shadow dot min resolution. So this is the minimum dimensions allowed for rendering shadow objects to depth. So I don't know if this map actually shows a good example of it or not. But it's something you may have to play around with. I don't remember if I...
No, we are getting a quick question here from
go for it.
Hostile GeForce Garrett. Oh wow. So Garrett's asking about this panel. Did you make this? Where did this come from? How did you spawn it? I think you.
Oh yeah, this is just a widget blueprint that I made, and then it's nothing fancy. I swear it's not.
Is it like just a bunch of set variables on the other side of it?
So if I open up that's all it really is. So all I'm doing is I'm just calling whatever the widget is that I made, and then just putting that on the screen, and then all I did is I set up these options.
You just mapped all those buttons.
Yeah, and mapped out all these buttons. It's like nothing complex. I'm totally not a UI guy, so someone can make this much more pretty than I could.
Oh, okay. Well, that's cool to know.
But it's just all it's doing is like anytime I hit the button, I'm just calling an event
run
tick,
console.
And which is probably not the best thing, just to call an event tick, because
you're running event tick and then seeing if the button's down.
Yeah, that's all. I needed something quick and dirty.
That is quick and dirty.
I told you.
Oh, I shouldn't have asked.
I am not a UI guy.
That hurt me inside to hear that.
I could do it right if I wanted, but it's like I needed to have this done last week, and
so they're still requesting that you post the blueprints on the forum somewhere so they could take a look at them.
Oh God, no, no. We won't do that. People gonna judge me harshly. I'm ready for
judging the lighting guy's blueprint work. It's pretty harsh, guys.
Okay,
Come on.
Okay, so go back to this. So fade resolution. Let's see here. that one's the resolution and texels at which shadows are faded out. So I think the map that I actually used for this was actually different. I don't know if I actually test them on this one or not. That might be bad. Okay, so, whoops. Yeah, see if you can see where I just had that event. if I hold it down, that's just where it just goes crazy.
Overbite Games on YouTube post. That's so gross.
Oh, yes.
I should have admitted it.
So, the default for this is 64, but increasing it will keep smaller objects in scene that are rendered in shadow depth much longer. So that's something that for like smaller objects and things like that. This other one here below it, for the R shadow radius threshold, this one's actually a project setting as well, but it can actually be called at runtime, depending on whatever you want to change. So it's like I got the default setting, which is 0.03 here, and then 0.01, and then I've got this outrageous one of 0.5. So it's like, actually, I think you saw it really quick. So you can tell I have a bad UI because I have to keep hitting the back tick just so I can't just hover over the UI.
Oh.
So I told you this is my little hacky workaround.
There is a checkbox for like, enable allow mouse.
See, I should have talked to you before that. Okay, so as we can see here, like if I increase this one to 0.5, it's like my shadow disappeared over there in that back distance. So it's a way of keeping shadows for other objects in the scene much longer than may be needed. 0.03 is a really good setting that we use by default, but again, just depending on your needs, the size of your scene, what you want to call for quality settings and whatnot, that might be something that you can look at increasing if you don't want to pay that shadowing cost for these really small objects that are off in the distance. So, and then I think there's one to skip it over here, shadow distance scale, r.shadow distance scale. So what that one is trading shadow distance for performance with directional lights. And what it actually is a multiplier for dynamic shadow distance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back out of that for a second, turn off the distance filled shadows. So if I back up here to this distance that's outside of my 5,000 units, or 1,500 units that I had, what I can actually do is if I go here and I've got our shadow distance. So at 1, it's keeping the settings that you have there. If I use 0.5, it's going to half of those settings. And then if I go to 2, what it does is it doubles the distance that is there. So that may be something that you can quickly do, for your settings for quality without having to worry about like all the other transitional settings that you had. You can actually just set this distance multiplier and call this to double, lower, or half, depending on whatever the setting is that you want to go for. So the other one down here, I'll come back to shadow quality in a second. The R light function, since we can see our light functions off on the side, I've got 2 here. There's 0 and 2. There's actually 2 other settings that have not been implemented yet, but if you look at the description for them, there's actually like on the plan to ever get around to it. But for instance, shadow 0 will disable, 2 will enable, 1, when it's ever implemented, will take it to a half resolution, and then 3 would actually use colored light functions. That would be an amazing day when that's enabled. So okay, so, and then the particle light one, I'll come back to that one in the last map I'm going to show. The distance field shadows ones, I showed this one earlier. I actually don't have distance fields. Let me go and enable that again. So if we come back and we enable our distance fields, we can see that since it's our far shadowing technique right now, if I come up here, bring up my menu, and then if I disable those, I lose those distance field shadows, and I'm relying solely on cascaded shadow maps. And then, actually, real quick, I'm going to go back and set all my other stuff to defaults.
I feel like you could just make a default button also.
Man, your critique of my UIing is making me feel bad.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. No,
Okay,
it's
so-
actually really impressive that you you set
it's
this all
impressive
up.
that I did this?
No,
That's
it's
what I
an
heard.
impressive
Okay,
menu.
so-
People actually
okay,
really
so-
like your menu. It's a good
So,
menu.
enabled, disabled, for our distance fields. The same for for distance field AO. If this were an AO'd area, like wasn't directly lit, well, actually it can be. Let's okay, so let me move down here. Let's see here. Yeah, and then enable and disable for distance field AO. So it's like you can see distance in that, and I'll show that again in my little final map I have here. Is there any other questions before I go to that last map? And then
we've got quite a few, but we probably want to hop onto the last map. We're getting a little bit tight on time,
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
want to make sure that we
Oh,
go
sorry
over
about
that.
that.
And that's actually going to answer a lot of these.
Yeah,
Unless you know,
this-
does distance field shadowing work on the Nintendo Switch? Haven't tried it yet myself.
I haven't tried. I haven't
mean,
tried anything with the Switch at this point.
Yeah, me neither, honestly.
Really, the only thing I mess with is the Xbox, a little bit on the PS4. So
Yeah.
I definitely want to mess.
We'll have
with
to
some
come
of the
back to that one then.
consoles.
But that's the only one that I was thinking
So-
was appropriate for right
this,
now.
This last map that I have here, this is my really bad art setup. Just using some of the kite demo assets from like the open world little simple project that we provided, not the whole kite demo. So one that comes up a lot is like how do you do cave lighting, and the transition between that is like, again, I'm not a lighting artist, so there's always like these little tweaks and things that you can make here. But I wanted to show this really kind of neat, hacky kind of trick that you may not have thought of. And what I have here is I have this plane back here that's at my entrance to my cave. And then as I back away, it just does a really like quick depth fade, or a distance fade. So that way it's you can see into it a little bit, but you can't see all the stuff. So if I hide that, this is the thing that I think a lot of people ask about and why they are like, it's like, how do I do cave lighting? Mm-hmm. And one simple way is just like, okay, you don't have to worry about having all your outside settings meet your inside settings. You can get your lighting set up the way you want for your world. And then whenever it comes to the cave, just use a post-process volume in there to help tweak the lighting that you have. And then, so what I have here is I actually have two post-process volumes. I have one that's a global one, and then I have another one that's inside my cave that just does a simple transition and using a blend radius. So it's like you can see that blend radius as I start to get closer, it starts to dim everything. And the lighting on here isn't, it's like this monitor is set up much different than mine. So it's like it may look different on different people's monitors. Like I see a little bit more specular highlights on this than I do on my monitor in my office. So, but just to go back to it, it's like, it's that one little trick of just having a plane or something there that has, so let me just go and unhide my plane that I had. Visibility, show all actors. You go back, you can kind of see that difference there that it's making. So I think that's a really easy hack to kind of do. So, and maybe that'll help some people that have some questions about just in general for that kind of transition, I guess. There's nothing special about the post-process settings that I've set up. I'm just going to go back into here real quick.
It's just the kind of default adaptations and...
No, I actually tweaked them, but it's like I use like a very low eye adaptation. And again, this is just my personal artistic tweak to it. It was nothing fancy. I'm not a lighting artist.
You always say that. Then
I
you
say
this
that.
is some nice lighting you've done here.
I say that because I'm not a lighting artist. I just know a bunch of settings. So it's like show all modified settings. So it's like the bloom, I tweaked the bloom, and then some of the advanced settings, just so it's like you get this little bit of blown out area around. But I mean, that was just my own personal tweak that I liked. So let me just do this, bring back up this a little bit. And this again is just using distance fields AO, so it's like that can actually, I just always like showing that off, so it can enhance a lot of the lighting that you have for especially like these trees. Like, so it's like if we let's see here, where is it? Very bottom. Distance fill AO is off. If I increase it, it's like, it's like you get that nice fill in for that top area of the tree. And, it's like if you're using the light function that I've actually got set up in this map, it's like as the light shadow passes over for the cloud function and all that, it's like you start to really see these kind of AO areas kind of pop out. So,
yep. I'm going to throw out another one here for cave environments. A lot of people in chat are also asking about like doing stuff with how about lighting dynamic things like characters inside the cave, etc. But not just what you're showing off here, but we also have another project you can go check out, which is the effects cave, which is in the Learn tab of the launcher. If you go onto the launcher under the Unreal Engine, then down on the side is Learn tab. A lot of people have been asking in chat over the course of this, where they can find out more about these kind of things. And the content examples there, and also I think that effects cave is probably going to be your best bet.
Yeah, the effects cave has a lot of really
more
cool
about how
stuff
this
in
is
there.
done.
With this, the character, I mean, since everything is directly lit, it's like, you're relying on the light that's in here. So it's like most everything in here is just the post-process kind of adding to it. And so it's like, that's why I can look a little bit.
He's looking a little bit blown out.
Yeah, a little bit blown out. It's like on my monitor, it doesn't look as bad. I'm not going to say this is horrible, but it's like, just the difference between the monitors that you're going to be working on versus the ones that you're actually going to. So it's like, let's see here, I have... Yeah, and then there's also some options here for particle lights, which would be, again, another thing. This is going to be probably the last little thing that I cover real quick, and then we can just kind of take some questions and go from there.
Alrighty.
So, but particle lights, I always just want to talk about these. Well, not always want to talk about them, but let's see here. So in your light module here for our particle editor, you actually have this option down here where you can actually have... under the light exponent, you have high quality lights, and then you have shadow casting lights. Shadow casting lights can be very expensive because depending on like if I enable it, my scene here is like I can get some of the shadow casting off there, but it's like I'm not a particle guy, like as far as like in depth. So this can probably be tweaked a little bit more. I probably talked to Eric on that one, but
yeah, I think there's probably a good thing to cover is going over some more of this dynamic lighting through Cascade and whatnot. And also we have like Niagara right around the corner too, it feels like. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, Niagara is that'll be awesome once that kind of comes our way.
Yes.
I know Sam is already like excited about learning it, so but yeah, it's like that's something to be aware of too, like with just with your particle lights and shadow casting, and having that enabled, it can be very costly, but it's an option that is there. So, it's like if you have any,
I don't know
questions
if you're feeling good.
I think
because I feel like the cave was the last map.
Yeah, it's the last map. Okay, so I guess the last one little thing I'm going to talk about before we just kind of open up questions, like, and this is mostly just going to be talk. I don't think I'll have really much to show on this part, but people ask about day-night systems. So some things that can actually
very much so. People ask about day-night systems.
Yeah. So the thing that can be very costly about it is, so depending on the angle of the sun. So as your sun is traversing the sky and as it gets towards the horizon line, cascaded shadow maps, because of the number of shadow casters which intersect with the shadow frusta, you actually get a higher cost during that time because the light is affecting more things. So that's something to be aware of as well. Like whenever you develop so if you ever see like a hitch, like right as you start to get around towards the horizon line, start profiling and seeing what you're affecting with your cascaded shadow maps there, because that's definitely gonna bump up the cost. The other thing is reduce the number of cascades or increase the culling radius. And you can use that by using that console command I showed, the r.shadow.radius threshold. So if you use a higher threshold value, you're reducing the number of like small objects that can cast shadows at further distances. So that's definitely something to help out. Reduced mass shadow casters can help. So alpha testing is particularly expensive during death passes only. So that's another thing. I never set up an example for this, but I actually just realized I had it in my notes here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drag in a tree real quick. I'm not gonna set up
trees.
Well, that's part of like
foliage trees.
Yeah, that's foliage tree. That's all the trees. So I pointed out earlier, it's like these trees are very expensive, just because they're a really large tree. Actually, I don't know if I've used that one. Let me find one I know I've used. Hilltop 3. Okay. So this tree, being very expensive the way it is, and having so many triangles, it's expensive for shadow casting. So one thing you can do is you can actually set up a shadow proxy just by so that way you can use a less expensive mesh. So the way you can go about that, and it's mostly just going to be talk because I didn't set up a real example, but so I have it selected. Actually, let me do this. Oh, that's why I got the modified properties. I was like, why is this not showing up?
Gotta make sure your filters are not set all the way crazy.
No. Yes, hidden shadow.
There you go.
So what you can do is you can have another tree, another model that is lower poly.
Oh.
And what you can do is you can disable shadow casting on this one,
and then enable it on the other one.
shadow casting on your other one. So
but
if you
turn off visibility on the other one.
Yeah. So it's like if you set up a blueprint.
That's so clever.
So that's one like way of kind of getting around that cost a little bit and trying to optimize your games even further. Another thing too, I completely forgot about
That is a very clever little trick, though. I didn't even think about that.
So yeah, it's like that's the whole point I like doing these things is just showing things that maybe you didn't consider. But if we go under the foliage tools here, we also have some more options for lighting somewhere. Instance settings. So like you can disable dynamic or distance field lighting, like if you didn't want to use it for any AO calculation. So if you have like a bunch of like little like grass, let's just say for instance, I don't want to always have like my grass just, since you can have so many objects there, I wouldn't always want to have those using dynamic shadows necessarily. So, or casting dynamic shadows, it can always receive the shadow. So that's one thing you can always disable, or even just the distance field lighting options. So it disables dynamic distance fields or distance field shadows and distance field AO for that. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I got there. So
cool. Yeah. Well, we can knock out a couple questions.
Okay.
We were a bit tight on time.
Yeah.
But want to.
Sorry, I always run over.
No. You managed to cover quite a few of these in the process, so that saves us this. Let's see here. A few people were asking about just intermingling static and dynamic lighting. Is there any way to combine bake diffuse and dynamic sunlight like in Stalker? And another one is it a bad idea to use static and dynamic lighting at the same time?
No. Okay, so with your directional lights, you can actually get so with stationaries, it does a transition between your static bake lighting and your dynamic, your cascaded shadow maps. There we go. There's the word I want. So if you treat, let's just think of that like distance fields. For instance, we use distance fields for dynamic far shadowing. your stationary directional light can do the same thing, to where it can use a lower resolution baked lighting at a further distance. So it's like I don't think it's bad. But if you're doing like open worlds, I would say for like your trees, I would never. Well, I wouldn't say never, but I wouldn't automatically go and have those casting static shadows.
Yeah, because I mean, especially if you have time of day, then you're gonna have like this weird like static baked in shadow, and then the dynamic shadow is like, oh hi buddy. Like,
exactly. So it's like if you're doing a dynamic day system or whatever, then that's one thing to consider. But it's like if you're doing just something that's just where the sunlight never moves, it's like you can probably get away with it and just use a lower resolution, because you're never gonna need like high quality at that far distance anyway. So.
All right. Another question here. Can you explain about? No, I don't know what this is. Light mass portals.
Oh yeah, light mass portals.
Okay.
That kind of falls more in the static lighting stuff. But,
okay, cool.
Just a short rundown on them. Essentially, they're used. So you have your light mass importance volume that's surrounding.
Yeah. Surrounds your whole scene.
Probably not going to do anything else in the editor. So if you want to get back to the main view,
good.
Yeah, there we go. So light mass importance, you have your light mass importance volume, and then you would use a light mass portal in like things for like openings for windows, doorways, or anything like where you want light to be directed. So it's telling the light mass importance. So as the rays are cast for the calculation, it's telling those to direct this area to have some lighting. So,
all right.
I mean, I don't have an example or anything to show, so it's all static lighting. But if you have more questions.
Oh, yeah. So let's see here. In your opinion, what is the main difference between Unreal and other graphics engines or rendering engines?
Don't know. I haven't used them.
Oh, okay.
I used Unity like while I was in school, and that was it.
Yeah.
I haven't tried CryEngine. I haven't tried Frostbite.
You ever used Marmoset or anything like that?
Mm-mm.
Oh.
No, I used Marmoset when it first came out, like when it was still in beta.
Oh, so it's vastly different now.
It is vastly different.
So that wouldn't really count at all.
I haven't used it really. So.
All right. Let's see here. A couple of people had asked questions about this. Demir asks, when I have DFAO turned on, I get a lot of black splotches / artifacts.
Yes.
Even on flat surfaces, like the foliage wall you were showing there, especially on stuff like hair. Any way to handle that?
So with that, use depending on the object that you have and the size that it has. So we talked a little bit about like the volume texture size that is generated. So it's like if you scale things up really large for distance field shadows or distance field ambient occlusion objects, they're not going to look as well. It's like they're not made to be like these really large scaled objects. And using the distance field ambient occlusion view mode that I showed earlier, and the same with the mesh distance field view mode, can show any of the artifacts that are happening. So it's like you may need to raise the quality of the distance field mesh that is generated as well to remove some of those artifacts, or either using some of that the distance field bias to remove some of those artifacts by shrinking that distance field representation, so that way it's not overlapping faces and causing that dark splotch.
All right. Let's see here. We've got I've got a couple of questions in here, more about larger scenes.
Okay.
Let's see here. How viable is it to use multiple small radius point lights in a scene, assuming they don't cast any shadows?
It's
to simulate bounce lighting.
Yeah, I've done that like in little things that I've set up. And actually, I think from a project we had, like or not a project of ours, but it's like someone who was doing like, I can't remember the name of it. It was like a space project, and they showed a picture of their bridge, and it had like so many point lights that were around, just used for like very low intensity and used for just bounce light, like as a simulation of bounce light. And I think like there's not like a significant cost to using those. Actually, I think point lights are actually less expensive than light maps when they are not shadow casting. So.
All right. Let's see here. We have quite a few questions coming in about VR advice for dynamic lights, but this one I'm actually going to take the pressure off of you.
Okay, there we go.
You guys get to tune in because we are actually going to get to do the Robo Recall performance optimization live stream. So I'm going to hopefully get some people on here for that. But I've got Jeff Ferris and hopefully Nick Donaldson also coming on this Thursday, and we're going to talk about VR, rendering optimization, and all of the cool optimization they did there. So I see a bunch of these questions coming in, and I hate to kind of bundle them all up and say that, but that way we can individually help you all out, because I don't think Tim's going to have a whole
I'm
some
not a VR
answers,
expert yet, so.
Yeah, some answers, but not the VR specific. Stereoscopic rendering kind of adds in a couple layers of complication.
I did have one question from the forums I remember I wanted to answer.
Oh, yes, of
so
course.
someone had asked, and it's like it kind of falls more back in that static lighting versus dynamic lighting for open worlds or for just larger open scenes. Because a lot of new users typically run into this, or people just who are new to using light maps or anything with lighting in Unreal. They may just go, hey, it's like everyone just goes, oh, use baked lighting, it's the best. But then someone goes, oh, well, I'm building this open world. And it's like I have all these things and lighting is taking forever. It looks like it's frozen or it's just not working right. So some things to consider there is like we don't typically build lighting for large open worlds. At that point, the cost that you would pay on your GPU for the dynamic shadows versus the amount of texture memory that you would have to use to store all those light maps, they kind of outweigh each other. So it's just and then you're looking at the length of time it would just take to build all of those things in general. So because like you have that, your light is casting its rays, and then anything that it's affecting, it's like it has to, as that ray bounces, it's having to work those calculations out for light mass, and that's just it can become exponentially large, and you may even just get light mass crash. So
that's
because you
fun.
run out of local RAM. So it's like typically you would use something like Swarm Coordinator and use your Swarm farm.
If you've got it, or
if you have it,
if you're connected to some service that gives you a Swarm farm. Yeah. All right.
This here.
Any other questions off of that? I've got one last one for you if you're all good there. Because we're cutting pretty close. We're on about the hour 30-minute mark, so this will probably be the last one. But this is all very informative and awesome. The last question here, and this might also be a good one for Andrew Hurley to cover. I think he might have covered it in the last stream he was on too. But what is the best light options for really massive grasses on a field? I found people are using distance field data, some archivolts.
Using distance fields?
Yeah, he says he found people using distance field data instead of other options.
I don't typically do a lot of large landscape stuff and with grass, so it's like, but I mean, I guess depending on the grass that you have, it's like if it were like low grass, I would still say just disable
the shadows on it.
Disable shadows, because you're going to receive shadows on it.
Yes.
But you don't necessarily want to have to pay the cost of that. But it's like if you're using distance field, that's cheaper than using than cascaded shadow maps in some cases. But then again, that goes back to tweaking some of the other settings to get, if you're using cascaded shadow maps to be closer to you, a lower dynamic shadow distance, then that's more beneficial than just having the 20,000 units. That way you're stretching out to far and beyond and paying that cost per triangle. So, and especially since you have a lot of masked or either alpha materials there.
Yeah, because it's grass, so it's kind of
so
how
then
the material setup has to be, and then you have the layers and layers of rendering going on.
So then you're going into shader complexity and everything else. So
yeah, that definitely doesn't sound like too much fun, but I do know that we've covered off on a lot of stuff about performance and foliage in a previous stream with Andrew Hurley. Getting started with landscapes, part 2 was the one specifically about foliage. But getting started with landscapes is a great other stream to check out. Cool. So I think that's going to be it for time today. Thank you all so much for coming out and watching. Thank you so much, Tim, for coming on and presenting all of this awesome stuff. And I'm so sorry about last time. If you guys were here for last time, unfortunately didn't get the Tuesday stream, but we've managed to to get it all settled and figured out. Thank you, Clint. You're the most awesomest buddy. Yes, you guys can't see him. He gave me a thumbs up back. But thank you all again for coming out. We'll see you all next time. Remember, we're always streaming on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2 p.m., so just join us then. See you around. Bye-bye.
See you, everyone.